Really privileged, honored, and fortunate to have with us Mr. M J Akbar. He needs no introduction, but let me say he's a public intellectual, former minister, author, prolific writer, and you read his books. I mean, he can fuse history, international relations, poetry, and prose into one. I mean, they are just fantastic reading. Shade of Swords, Blood Brothers, and so many more books. But what I would particularly like to point out, especially to the young generation, is that in an age when editors in the Indian media landscape were larger than life, in terms of editorial craft and poise, Mr. Akbar dwarfed many of those illustrious peers. So he was really a great, editor. And through some very eloquent arguments, persuasive reasoning, and catchy turns of phrase, he would open up fresh insights, move the ideological needle, and shake the political discourse. तो इससे ज़्यादा मैं आपकी क्या तारीफ करूं सर? Because the small town that I come from, Lucknow, they say कि अपने से बड़ों की ज़्यादा तारीफ करना बदतमीजी मानी जाती है. So I'll stop the baptimizi and now get to the facts. But before I do that, I would just like to say one more thing. That in a sense, Mr. Akbar is a man, in my view, of incredible erudition, wisdom, and above all, clarity. I was reading, I think, on the speaking tree in the Times of India last month, and somebody said that Vidya is, of course, about knowledge, but more importantly, it is about clarity. And we shall try today and tap into his sense of clarity about West Asia and the wider geopolitics in this very turbulent world. So, sir, a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for gracing the festival and for being part of this conversation. The first question flows from the title of this panel itself. West Asia is obviously in a crisis, but how deep seated is the crisis? And in terms of the historic metrics of the Middle East, is this crisis unprecedented? So, a bird's eye view, sir, of the Middle East from a historical lens, a geostrategic perspective, and the likely futures. Your opening remarks, Fred.
Thank you very much, Raj. And I, I don't know quite what to say about the build-up that you provided. I hope some of it is true.
It is, it is.
So, the uh, the subject itself, while formulating your question, you use two terms. One is West Asia, and the other is Middle East. Are the two coterminous? Number one, I was speaking at Manama at the famous, and there the title a few years ago, and there the title was The Future or the Past. Sometimes you don't know the difference uh, of the Middle East. And I asked a very simple question. This was to the Arab audience, and this is in Bahrain. I said, ladies and gentlemen, can you please let me know in the middle of which East are you? It's very important to understand this. We use the term geopolitics, but geography is critical to geopolitics. And the correct perspective of geography is also very, very vital to understanding. West Asia is not the middle of the East. The only country which is in the middle of the East is India. But the British created this Middle East because it is in the middle of the region between London and India. And since then, they have polluted our understanding of the region. And I use the word consciously polluted our understanding of the region. Reframe it to West Asia. And then let me tell you why the Ukraine war is actually critical to an understanding of West Asia. Now, you'd think that, I'm talking apples and oranges. No. How far is Ukraine from the Caucasus? Next door, literally next door. is Delhi and Haryana, right? How far is Caucasus from the South Caucasus, which is Grozny, which is where the Chechens are fighting in Ukraine right now as we speak. And by the way, as you know from war, right? Troops who fight ask for their price, and the price is not money. The Chechens who are fighting there are not there because they're mercenaries, because they have a larger perspective. How far is Dagestan from Syria? Well, your large town Lucknow is much closer, much further away from Delhi than Grozny is from Syria, right? How far is Syria from Israel? How far is Israel from the Houthis? And just in case you understand why India is a participant in the war, whose navy at the moment is engaged in military conflict at on the Red Sea? The Indian Navy. The war has already reached us. If we understand the contiguity of the region, because your crisis term obviously involves an understanding of war. Wars do not have borders. The last World War, the reasons why the Americans were fighting the Germans or the British were fighting the Germans was completely different from why the Chinese were fighting the Japanese. But it merged into one war. Was the conflagration, fire searches for fire. And in that fire, we are not too far away. The whole of the region, I went from Aden to Bombay, let's say, but between Aden and Bombay is a region which had been at war for the last 50, 70 years. Afghanistan, Pakistan. And by the way, this term that which is familiar to the strategic uh, experts, which is AFPAC. I've never believed that there's a region called AFPAC. It is actually CHAFPAC. Because without China's presence, Afghanistan and Pakistan become basically, I mean, to use a frank term, impotent. That is the power which gives them resonance. And the wars that are going on there, it's not a single war. The wars that are going on there all have the resonance in history. You ask whether this crisis in quote unquote Middle Asia, West Asia, is unprecedented. Is it worse than the Crusades that took place over 2 centuries? And just in case you think that the Crusades are not resonating today, the language of war has not changed from the Crusades. The invader's name might change, but the forces that come in just reinvent themselves. So I would actually argue and suggest to you to think about that some wars have immediate objectives. There is a war, let us say, I don't know if it would call it a skirmish or a conflict or La- Galwan, Ladakh. There is a war for the Himalayas. There is a war for Kashmir. There is a war for this and that and the other. There are some wars which are wars of exhaustion. They do not exhaust themselves. They work across a time frame of millennia. That is the power of history in our lives. And the positive elements of history disappear all too quickly. The negative elements, conflict elements of history continue for far longer than we think.
So the salience of West Asia in the larger international calculus. That's my next question. And why I say that, former Singapore diplomat George Yeo, he recounts his conversation with an unnamed Chinese diplomat, and the Chinese diplomat is telling him that whenever we, the Chinese, are in trouble, West Asia comes to our rescue. So, at a time when the Americans were trying like hell to sharpen their pivot to the Indo Pacific to deal with the massive PLA buildup in the first island chain, this pivot was first interrupted by Ukraine and then by events in West Asia. So, I mean, just to point out, a couple of months back, for the first time in decades, the Western Pacific was without an aircraft carrier. It had to move to the Middle East. So we see waning American influence in the Indo Pacific that might encourage Z to do something in Taiwan. So, in that context, West Asia is a distraction from other global hotspots, the consequences, the impact on the global balance of power. Any thoughts on that? The interconnectedness of theaters.
Uh, the modern the modern era of this conflict begins from let's say 1890s, when in a very small place called Masjid e Suleiman, oil is discovered. Uh, let's also remember another fact of history. Nobody conquers a poor country. The cost of mobilization, you have to pay the return on it, has to come from the conquered country. Who was interested? India was conquered because it was rich. In 1750, the what would be the equivalent of world manufacturing output? And this, by the way, is not a statistic that I invented in honor of our national discourse at Bhopal, but it's from a book, the Rise of Nations, written by a professor of Yale. Uh, in 1750, in terms of world manufacturing output, China had 30% and India had 25%. Britain had 2%. By 1947, Britain had 23% and India had 2%. There is no better definition of colonization. I don't know how many of you are aware of a book called Hobson Jobson. It's a very, I think, the finest intellectual exercise done by any bureaucrat. It's a dictionary of British India done in 1870s. And in it, I mean, also remarkable honesty, I must say, because the definition of colonialism given in Hobson Jobson by two British bureaucrats is economic exploitation. But to get back to our point, so the discovery of oil there began the return of West European interest, because simultaneously with the discovery of oil, I mean, we're talking in terms of early decades, which is, say, the first decade of the 20th century. The most important thing to happen in the first decade of the 20th century was the use by Germans of oil for their naval ships. The moment the Germans started using oil as a principal fuel for their naval ships, the British had to catch up. World mobilization had to catch up. So the demand for oil did not begin in service of common people or in search of our energy and electricity, because it began as a military necessity. And therefore, the rise of oil into the horizon of economic interest brought the West there. Simultaneously, simultaneously, the Muslim empires of the region, which is principally the Persian and the Ottoman, they had entered into their phase of decline. So conquest and inroads into both the Persian and the treaties that were signed, where they were not treaties of equal nations, they were imposed treaties. And those treaties that were signed began the story of economic exploitation by the West in this region. That led in a chain reaction to the creation of outposts in the region. Now, you can take whichever version of history that you want. I don't want to get into that controversy. But certainly, it is an undiluted fact, or, can be unchallenged fact that the Western interest in that region changed eventually the geographies of the region. If you want to know how the map of present West Asia was created, you have to go to Cairo. And in Cairo, there used to be a great hotel. It was called Shepherd's Hotel, a great colonial hotel. Not as good as Jahanam, but still. the, the, oh, lovely. The, but still, Cairo, it was very famous. I think now it's been torn down. So Churchill was taking a painting holiday. Churchill was a good prime minister and a very bad painter, but he liked painting better than his prime ministership, I think. Uh, Sitting there in 1922, he created artificially a map. Jordan did not exist. But because British political interests had to be served, because they had to remove the kings of Jordan, who were actually the original kings of what is today's Saudi Arabia. I mean, there was no nation called Saudi Arabia. I'm sure you realize that because it's the only nation named after a family. We are lucky, aren't we? We just
Yeah.
escaped that. So Jordan was created in order to create a kingdom for a family that had been pushed out. So this dislocation of geographies is an important part of the complex realities that have shaped conflict. And that is why these conflicts sometimes are defy logic.
So you mentioned oil. Oil has for long given West Asia its strategic salience. But if Trump's declaration of this energy emergency and these proclamations of drill, baby, drill do take concrete shape and make the USA the leading oil energy producer, are we also seeing the beginning of a new modernizing strategic discourse in West Asia? And why I say that is the old bargain was very simple: Saudi Arabian oil for American security. Now you have MBS offering $600 billion to invest in the USA in return for strategic stability at home. I was just as the Ricina Middle East, where everybody was speaking of a new geopolitical metaphor, distancing itself from religious conservatism, declining dependence on hydrocarbons, non oil growth, so on and so forth. So, and some of it was, energy hubs to power the emergence of USA as the AI capital of the world. So we see a very new modernizing discourse. So is this old bargain, sir, giving way to a new deal? Any views on this, or is this just a temporary measure, or is this a major transformation from oil to technology, AI, investments, and so on and so forth?
See, we have to make a very sharp, in our trying to understand this, we have to make a very sharp distinction between energy and pricing. In the 1970s, a great crisis took place because OPEC decided to raise the price of oil to $3 a barrel. Right? That was the price of oil. Today, if there is an American glut, the price of oil might change. But the requirement for oil, I do not see it disappearing because the cheaper the fuel, the more its demand. Uh, Technologies don't change until the people who control technology, which is the uh, basically profit making companies, they find an alternative profit model. It is a well known fact, for example, and I hope I'm not moving away from the subject, but just to give you an example, that levers had found a way to clean clothes without soap, but never introduced it because it would destroy the company's profits, right? So the profitability factor, I don't think is going to disappear. Quiz question: how many bases does America have across the world?
800.
860, actually. Maybe 60 more were added since we last checked. These bases are not there in order to protect the world from insecurity. They are there in order to protect and then expand American interests. That is what the meaning of power and superpower is.
Freedom to
So,
roam the globe,
yeah.
they say.
So as long as America's interests, superpowers' interests, are met satisfactorily, and the interesting thing about Trump is that instead of squaring up American interests with the interests of the rest of the world, which would be more equitable, which would be in tune with modern sense of justice and equality, right? He's expanding America's interest as an inalienable right. So we'll see how far that grows. I mean, his Teddy Roosevelt and McKinley tried it 200, 100, what, in the last decade of the 19th century. So we shall see how far that travels.
Maybe now, sir, turn to the primary source of conflict in the Middle East, the Palestinian question and the so called existential threat to Israel. If I may just make one point, I think it was in 1967-73, in the course of the two wars, when we saw the challenge of Arab nationalism mounted by Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, which was repulsed by Israel, and Israel came to acquire this aura of military invincibility. In the more recent challenge mounted by Iran, the proxies, and allies in Syria, the Shiite crescent. Uh, it ultimately culminated in the attack of 7th October 2003. And once again, Israel seemed pretty vulnerable. But through some statecraft, Israel seems to have degraded, if not destroyed, degraded much of the Shiite crescent and restored its strategic military advantage. But what next, sir? More cycles of conflict. And the real question really is this, that Israel wins the wars again and again. But when and how will Israel win the peace? That's my question. If,
You cannot win a war which has not ended. And Israel's victories are basically required and again because the war has not ended. It's all right to say that you have won a battle. Battles have been won consistently. It's the last battle, always, that defines a war. Germany in the First World War won every battle except the last. So history is shaped by the last battle. And in this region that we are talking about, you talked about the Shia Crescent. Uh, the first, I think, articulation of that, at least to my knowledge, I hope I'm not exaggerating, was in my book, The Shade of Swords. The Shade of Swords, the phrase comes from a hadith: paradise will come to you under a shade of swords. And that is, by the way, not an invitation to kill, but an invitation to die, which is quite a different story. This Shia arc, when was it created? And the Shia arc extends actually from the edge of Afghanistan, Mazar-e Sharif, from Mazar-e Sharif to Iran, Iraq, and then Assad, Syria. That's a significant change that has taken the Alawite Syria, the Syria, not the present dispensation. Just to connect the dots, who created the Shia? All praise to His Majesty George Bush. If George Bush had not invaded Saddam's, you know, and Saddam was as Sunni as you get, of Saddam's Iraq, and changed the dispensation, the Shias, who were always in a demographic majority, would not have come to power, as they had not come to power since Saladin. It's one of the curious facts. The only place actually we had Shia power. And in fact, since you're getting into a subject, Iran was not a Shia country at all until the 15th century, 16th century. The real Shia capital was Cairo. The Fatimids there were there for 150 years, 200 years. Anyway, the the this arc was completed by quote unquote liberation of Iraq from Saddam. And this, the unintended consequences of war is the one aspect of conflict which everybody searching for a war should be very careful about. What you intend to do and what emerges. And this created the arc. Now, since then, there has been a very strong, the Arab Spring was part of it, basically to challenge, uh, take Syria. Iran's interest in Syria is not simply ideological and geographical. The Persians have been looking for a gateway to the Mediterranean from the time of Xerxes and Darius. So there is nothing new in the Iranian ambition either. But in this present dispensation, this Iranian, now look at, you know, where Iran has moved. We have watched Iran in 1980. Iran had lost 8 million people in a war with Iraq in 1990s, sorry. 89 was the revolution. In 1990s, devastated country. They have emerged today as one of the major military powers of the region. And this war that we have seen initiated with Al Shara, it's going to take yet another unexpected turn because the ideology of Al Shara is not at the moment apparent in his statements. And we will see where it goes. He is the ideological partner of the forces represented by 9/11, or was, just because he's decided to wear a tie. uh, you know, I don't think he's forgotten either his past, and I doubt if he has forgotten his future.
Right. So, one last question before I open it up to the audience. And this question obviously has to be the ceasefire, Hamas and Gaza. So, the question really is this that if Hamas was only an army, it may have been destroyed. But if it is an idea, it will reconstruct itself. It may already have. The 18 to 20,000 Hamas fighters who were killed have been re recruited. Yahya Sinwar's brother is amongst the new crop of leaders. So, what is the future of Hamas, Gaza, and the ceasefire? Day 42, when it comes to Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, pulling back from the Philadelphia corridor, uh, Hamas still remaining the predominant force, and Netanyahu being under pressure from the right wingers. They are telling him to restart the war or we will resign, so on and so forth. So, your views, sir, on Hamas, the ceasefire, will it hold, and the immediate prospects in Gaza?
Well, I'm glad we agreed on one thing, that it is a ceasefire, not the end of the war. And that is probably the best definition. By the way, Philadelphia corridor, what does Philadelphia mean? It's from the language of the Crusades. So the it is a ceasefire at the moment. You cannot defeat a people until they have lost the spirit to resist. And I don't think we see any evidence of, look at the look at the punishment that the Palestinians have taken. I have absolutely no sympathy. Believe me, and I want to say this clearly, I have absolutely no sympathy for terrorism. You cannot walk into a music hall where young people are enjoying music and abduct people, whatever might be the cause. You can't. The world cannot justify it. On the other hand, the punishment that has taken place after that, right? And for perhaps political reasons rather than strategic reasons, right, has lost Israel something very valuable. And that is the sympathy of the neutral people, sympathy of the non partisan. Today, the world cannot be imprisoned in one dark corner. Social media has made that impossible. You can buy out regular media, as indeed it's a purchase which is done regularly. But social media, for all its faults, and there are millions of faults, excesses, rubbish, nonsense, but it allows information to walk across, seep across, flow across the barriers put by governments and the barriers put by official media and private sector media. So, in this day and age, to lose the sympathy of the non partisan people, which was one of the great assets that Israel had, Israel was the victim nation of forces surrounding it. Today, that image has been diluted, to put it, I think, mildly. And every war changes reality. So we are already now recognizing the new realities that are now currently in place and how they will shape the future, you know, well, only time will can tell that to
Thank
us.
you very much, sir. Something's gone wrong with this. Okay, we open for questions, please. We start with the youngest in the audience. Yeah, please. Welcome you, sir. That young lady there, please. Can you just look at this mic?
Yeah, take this.
Jaldi talk after the class. Yeah, quickly, please. Huh? And please keep your question pointed and short. Not a quick.
Jane sir, myself Kezia Thomas. I wanted to ask what should be India's stance for the current Afghanistan rule, the Talibani rule?
In Afghanistan,
Yes, sir.
I see. Um, it's outside the matrix, but still demands an answer. I think India's stance is, I think the trust I have in the NSA in these matters is enormous. NSA being Ajit Doval. And I think the excellent way in which we have kept emotionalism aside in order to advance and protect our strategic interests in the region is an extremely good example of silent strategic diplomacy. I am terrified of vocal diplomacy because it can be very counterproductive. But the silent strategic diplomacy that is being employed in our relationships with Afghanistan is because we know what is the true threat. And we know that we would need uh, friends, right? Or if not friends, at least an assurance that our existing problems do not acquire strategic depth. Uh, I'm sure some of you will understand precisely what I'm saying. And if I am not as clear as I would like to, he accused me of clarity, quite forgetting that we are going to discuss West Asia. But sometimes one can't say more than one can say.
Right, Jen Shankar, sir.
Uh, Thanks a lot for to both of you for this wonderful discourse on West Asia. I have a very simple question. It was once said that if you want to go to war in West Asia, you go to Egypt. You want to get peace, you go to Syria. That whole thing is flipped. Where do you see this going here?
Uh, that configuration, I think, was pre present circumstances. And since 1973 and the capture of the Golan Heights and the deal made between one of the things about Assad, which people don't realize, is that the deal he made with Israel held as much as the deal with Jordan and the deal brokered eventually at Camp David with Cairo. Right? The danger, and I'm glad you pointed it out, the danger is all those arrangements are now in flux. In flux. And influx means uh, enormous danger because if if the Camp David peace, which has held through enormous conflicts, disappears, and Egypt becomes a frontline state. Right? At this moment, please understand the Palestinian resistance in military terms. They don't have an air force. They have missiles. They do have missiles, but not the best of them. They don't really have drones. I mean, compared to what has been done without the support of any regional army. So, uh, if that construct collapses, then we might see levels of. Because one thing I've seen, I've traveled that region. It's extremely saddening to travel through that region. Generations lost, the meaning of life itself lost. Uh, when you go through that anguish, and I can't bear to see the anguish of young people. Wars are started by the old, and the people who die are the young. It's easy for old people to order wars because nobody tells them to fight it. Who dies? Right? It's the barbaric cruelty that has been inflicted upon that region by old people who want to remain in power, nothing else. However, this said, once this construct that has been carefully constructed through much of the 20th century, if that collapses, I think you will see 30 years of havoc that will leave the past 30 years behind.
Yeah, the gentleman with the Himachali cap.
Sir,
So,
just
him, please. We'll get you.
honorable sir, what is the take of India in the in imbroglio, West Asia imbroglio, since we have so many white-collared and blue-collared people there in different jobs? What is the best option for India in this West Asia imbroglio, taking into account that so many white-collared and blue-collared people are there?
The best option for India is the oldest and the newest option. Protect your interests and keep out of it.
Yeah, the Sikh gentleman. Okay, the आप पूछिए.
Hello, sir. I'm Raguraj. Sir, my question to you is there is a consensus that the two state solution is the best solution to the Israel Palestine conflict. Now, what is preventing that from happening?
Geography. Geography is a major intervention to history. Everybody agrees on the two-state solution, but which is the state? Where are the boundaries of the state? Nakba. Whose Nakba are we talking about? The Jewish had their own Nakba. So how far do you go back? Where do you draw the line? Where do you get consensus? And when death becomes a habit, my friend, all consensus is washed away by blood.
Okay, the Sikh gentleman, then Brigadier Agarwal after that.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. So my question is, when we take back from 1985, the more of the West Asia crisis is just due to the resources that are there, like the Western attacks in Iraq back in 1990. It's more of that the American dominance for its oil. That is somewhat will take the crisis more ahead 50 years.
No, it's not. I mean, what you say is right, but not the full truth. Because never forget that one of the impacts of this war, which again doesn't seem to find the headlines, but is a very basic and important truth, is that because the Red Sea corridor was blocked, the price of goods rose by 70%. Now the world is run by people who want profits, and this is a very major factor. I mean, why is the greatest mobilization around the Red Sea and the Malacca Straits? Because these are choke points. Why does President Trump want the Panama Canal? These are the choke points. Actually, the Panama Canal is one of the smallest canals ever conceived of. It's so tight, barely a ship can go through one at a time. However, the point is the Suez, the Panama and Malacca Straits are the choke points of world trade and commerce. So there's much more at stake there. But eventually, the real stakes are the people who live there and what they want and how they want to fashion their lives. The 20th century is very different from every other epoch of history. May I take a minute of this?
Please, please.
And it's very important to understand that because modern history and the modern world begins after 1918, not because of the end of the World War, but because it produced the collapse of previous political formations, which is the concept of the empire as the hold all for regions. And that was replaced by the modern nation state. So since then, for now 150 years, 100 years, we have been fighting, the world has been fighting on what will be the nation state. We in South Asia are still struggling with it. What will be the nation state? Thank God, India has become what it has, a cogent nation, both in theoretically and in practical terms. It's not important only to have the theory. You have to also prove it in practice. But many parts of the world have actually still struggling. That region is still struggling with the meaning of a nation state and where exactly its ideological cogency and boundaries lie.
Brigadier Agarwal. I've been just one.
Thank you for the opportunity. Sir, could we please have your views on the specifics of what India should do and not do to promote its national interest in West Asia and through West Asia? Thank you.
Well, I think we are doing what is precisely the right thing. We are intervening at precisely the point where our strategic outreach, right? This is forward defensive. uh, British Empire strategy for the Himalayas, as you know. But in the across the Indian Ocean,
Yeah,
and
please,
now
please.
in the Indian Ocean from the Gulf right up to we are using forward defense. And the fact that our navy is engaging in the Houthi areas is a very sure sign of where we define our interests. And as I said, protect your interests and get out of the way of somebody else's fight.
Before I ask this lady, sir, is Turkey rewriting the geopolitics of West Asia?
Turkey has now become the most important power in that region. Turkey now has re-established the quasi-Ottoman control over Damascus. It's not Damascus, Damascus. And Turkey now is taken. I don't know how long the Russians will stay in Latvia. Much will depend upon how Erdogan and Putin work out. This year will see the shape of the strategic future of that region, and there could be surprises.
Yeah, please.
Jai Hind, sir.
We had overshot time. We have 10 minutes more to go. I'm keeping a track, huh?
I
Yeah, please.
apologize.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, my question is, sir, you said that how history, winners of the history decides the political discourses. So similarly, the weaponization of trade and oil diplomacy, especially in the West Asia region. Sir, my number one question is how much economics in terms of weaponization of trade and oil is going to build up the next discourses, A. And sir, how India can play a major role in building its regional power in terms of building its own discourses for its own interest. Thank you.
Excellent question. Excellent. In terms of an answer to the first, I tell you the answer lies in your question. So I really don't need to amplify. It is exactly the way you formulated the question. that you will see events play out. The economic aspects of it are critical to whatever happens next. Now, as far as India is concerned, what precisely was the point that you wanted? Yeah, India has already done something dramatic, and may I use this opportunity to discuss a policy which the Prime Minister of India, Modi ji, has actually changed. It's a remarkable new policy which is unprecedented and unfortunately has not been recognized sufficiently. India has created a new neighborhood. India no longer treats geography as the only quotient of neighborhood. We now define, the Prime Minister now defines geography, a neighbor by terms of reach, not distance. Now, I'll give you a very simple example which may not be there in the official policy. There are 1,000 flights every week from here to the Gulf. You can't get a seat. There's not a single flight to Pakistan, right? And if there was, every seat would be available. Who is my neighbor? Nothing to do with religion. The Gulf has more Muslims, citizens, than Pakistan. Nothing to do with religion. Indonesia, 250 million Muslims. Nothing to do with Muslim religion. It is a relationship with reach, with rational nations, with rational entities who want a good equation with us. Right? And therefore, our neighborhood is now from the Gulf to Indonesia, which is also fits in actually with what you have heard previously here, with the sense of Bharatvarsh.
All right, we just have the last three set, one here, and one there.
जी
And
नमस्कार
quickly, please.
मैं धीरे चतुर्वेदी हूँ औपचारिक रूप से जब आपके साक्षात्कार का अंत हुआ तो आपने एक बात कही थी कि इजराइल ने जिस प्रकार से वॉर किया है उसके कारण उसने पूरी जो सहानुभूति है उसने खो दी और काफी कुछ
देखिए पूरी नहीं, लेकिन
काफी
जरूर कुछ सहानुभूति
खो दी। मेरा प्रश्न सर ये है कि जो अपहरण की जिस प्रकार से घटना हुई उसके बाद नेतान्याहू साहब के पास और क्या-क्या विकल्प थे जैसा उन्होंने किया उसके सिवा कि ये सहानुभूति की जो परिस्थितियां बनी है वैसी उतनी ना बनी होती। धन्यवाद सर।
जी देखिए हर चीज की एक माप होती है, मापदंड कहते हैं। दंड का भी एक माप होता है। आप कोई भी क्रिमिनलिटी करे, चोरी करे, सजा होती है। एक सजा जब हद से बाहर हो जाती है ना, तब दुनिया कहती है कि ये भी अन्याय हो गया। ये इस बात सही नहीं कि सजा के गिल्ट नहीं हुआ था, या चोरी नहीं हुई थी, या मर्डर नहीं हुआ था। मैंने शुरू में कहा कि कोई भी संभावना में, कोई भी एनालिसिस में मैं किसी किस्म का सहानुभूति या जस्टिफिकेशन मैं वो टेररिज्म को नहीं दे सकता हूं। तो अगर इसराइल ने कार्रवाई की, प्रधानमंत्री मोदी या प्रधानमंत्री मनमोहन सिंह, जब पाकिस्तान ने टेररिज्म किया कश्मीर पे, तो मोदी जी ने क्या किया? गए, क्रॉस किया, एयरफोर्स को भेजा, बालाकोट किया, उसके बाद बंद तो किया। तो इसीलिए सारी दुनिया की समर्थ है, सब समझते हैं कि हाँ पाकिस्तान को पनिशमेंट देना चाहिए। एक्चुअली मैं उस वक्त बहुत नाराज था जब बंबई के कांड के बाद हमने कुछ नहीं किया। उस वक्त भी बहुत क्या कांड हुआ था 2008 में, हमने कुछ नहीं किया, वो भी गलत था। लेकिन उसके वजह से, एक टेररिस्ट के वजह से, क्या हम पाकिस्तान के साथ 10 साल का युद्ध लें, मोले? हर चीज का एक निर्णय होता है। यही निर्णय सबको रखना चाहिए। मापदंड जो है बहुत ही, तो हमारे शास्त्रों में लिखा हुआ, इसका मतलब क्या हो?
Sir, please.
My name is Chandrakant, and I'm an ex-army man who's had the unique privilege of having served in Palestine as a part of the United Nations way back in 64 and 65, when most of the audience were probably not born. My question to you is, MJ, is this, besides other factors, the war that is going on in the South and West Asia, is it also not a war between Turkey, Iran, the Arabs, and Egypt to regain control or establish a new caliphate in the West Asia?
Sir, your certainly observation is valid, but I think if there are people in their senses, if, and I'm sure they all recognize, as I said just now in another context, that after 1918 and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the struggle today is no longer for renewal of a sultanate. And anybody who is living in those fantasies, in fact, your chap who was behind Osama bin Laden, he used to dream of a sultanate and a caliphate. That those people are now, pre-medieval perhaps. So that's not the struggle today is for what shall be the nature of the nation state. And that's what is. The Islamic community, one of the great myths is that the Islamic community, which has been perpetrated upon us by the creation of Pakistan, or the great myths is that Islam has ever been the basis of a nation. Islam has never been the basis of a nation. If Islam was sufficient as a basis of nation, why would there be 22 Arab countries? This is a this is a lie perpetrated upon us to destroy the unity of India,
Okay, yeah,
thanks
please.
to
Yeah.
British and their agents.
I have a two-parter. The first is, what would be your assessment of how and why the change in India's relationship over the past 75 years from being one of the first countries that recognized Palestine to being such a strong ally of Israel? And with this, what might be
You could just repeat your question. We couldn't hear you.
sorry. What would be your assessment of the change from India's relationship over the past 75 years from being one of the countries that first recognized Palestine to be such a strong ally of Israel? And with this, what might be your view of what justice, not simply peace, would look like for the Palestinians after 75 years of occupation and ethnic cleansing? Thank you.
This is we recognized Israel, although we had a relationship with Israel even before that. They had a trade mission in Bombay, for example. I recognized Israel 1993, maybe. And we have always argued since then. One, let us get this one another sort of supplementary myth out of the way, because it is part of the unspoken political discourse that somehow Indian Muslims don't want India to recognize Israel, which is a nonsense. Indian Muslims want a better life, they want a secure life, they want jobs, they want education, because they are normal human beings, right? The recognition of Israel is a strategic decision made by the nation. Now, having said that, it is India has always maintained that it is strong enough and confident enough to have relationships across binaries, just because they are regional conflicts. I remember Vajpayee ji, when there was a big conflict for some reason, I forget, between Iran and America, and he was due to go to America. In a different context, he made it a point of going to Iran for a day, because we are confident enough to have excellent equations with both. Today, we have very good equations with China and Taiwan. That is one of the strengths of India. And that is something that we are proud of. That is the confidence of the modern Indian nation state.
So I won't waste time. No, no, we've run out of time, please. I won't waste time summing up, but use this to ask Mr. Akbar one last question. So Iran is 2 weeks away from weaponizing its nuclear fuel. Consequences of a nuclear Iran investigation.
Uh, while the uh, while I may be alone in taking this view, uh, I have not yet seen any country who has gone nuclear use nuclear capability as an offensive strategic reality rather than a defensive strategic reality. India and Pakistan were nuclear at the same time. The rest of the world sanctioned us. Why? And Iran is run, by people who have a history of governance and understanding of it. Uh, why? Because there is nothing called successful nuclear attack. The moment you do indulge in a nuclear attack, you have announced self-destruction. And that paradox is really the paradox which is keeping much of the world safe, despite the presence of a potential holocaust every day, nuclear holocaust every day.
So thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. And on behalf of you all, may I say a big thank you to Mr. M J Akbar. Thank you so much, sir, for being part of this conference.
This is the BLF Memento, BLF 2025 Memento, an artwork by Bhuri Baiji. Her entire exhibition. Ladies and gentlemen, we also break for lunch and meet again at 1:40. So see you all here in Antarang, sharp at 1:40.
Dear all, please be back at 1:40. Jal se jal वापस आएगा will be having the lure of old tunes, the sessions about the nostalgic old tunes, evergreen old tunes. Please be back at 1:40 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody.
Nice. I just wanted to ask, I want to get, but I'm sorry. So how can I give